Welcome GRD 131, Graphic Design 1, and possibly Typography 1, GRD 132. I'm not sure if both classes will be using this video, but I want to show it to the GRD 131 class right now. And this is the Gravit Web Fonts, the Google fonts that we have available in Gravit. Now, because we have a class online, it's harder to make sure we have a consistent set of fonts to work with. I can't guarantee everybody has the same fonts on every computer, and we don't want to be that limited. And working in Gravit, there's a whole lot of fonts to use. The whole Google Web Font catalog. The problem is they're hard to recognize all of them. There's so many of them. They have names we don't recognize, and I'm trying to find ways to make it a little easier to work with them. So what I did, if you go to Unit 6, I made a sheet, both a file and a sheet you could look at. If you click on the link, there's a PDF file of the sheet that I made, and I just picked out the recommended serif fonts, both the old style, a transitional, a modern, a slab serif, and a couple sans serif fonts to give us a small group to work with. So we don't have this giant group of 500 fonts to try and look through. And I have been going through all of these fonts. I'm finding fonts that have a nice family of fonts, and I'll show you these in a minute. And going back to here, here's the file. So I'm going to click on this file, and I'm going to go through some of the fonts in here. Again, I have them broken down by old style, by transitional, as best I can. I mean, these aren't perfect. There's some subtle differences between old style and transitional. Transitional typically tends to be the transition between old style and modern, but in some cases, some of the transitional ones are a little more slab serif-like. So there's some crossover here. It's not perfect, but to be honest, I never worked a whole lot with transitional. I always just knew serifs, kind of old style and modern pretty much. And there's also slab serif and there's sans serif, and we'll talk about the grotesque and the humanist versions that are here. I don't have any geometric versions because frankly, they're not that nice to design with. So we're going to stick with kind of humanist and grotesque versions, which are like the Helvetica. So anyway, let me just go into some of these fonts just to show you these a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to start with the serifs so you can see these really nicely. And Crimson Pro I've used before, and I've had most of the classes use this because it's a really nice all-purpose font, Crimson Pro. It shows up well at small sizes. It doesn't have a lot of contrast, so it's fairly solid at small sizes. It looks nice. It's kind of more on the condensed side. It doesn't have too many little tiny serifs or anything like that. It's a real workhorse of a serif font, of an old style font. So it's kind of like Minion Pro if you've used Adobe Illustrator. And it has a nice family. If you see the family here, it has all of these fonts. There's probably, close to 20 fonts here, going from extra light and the italic versions and then all the way up to heavy. So it has a really nice heavy font. So you could do a lot just with one family of fonts. And I also have Garamond. It's called EB Garamond in Gravit or in Google Fonts. So it's a nice version of Gravit. They have a really nice italic font that's really calligraphic looking. It's not always really readable, but it's a nice stylistic font. You won't use it a lot, but it does stand out when you do use it. Plus, Garamond's a pretty standard font. There's Adobe Garamond, there's ITC Garamond that you might see. Another one in here that I picked out was Spectral. Now, I wasn't familiar with Spectral, but I thought at first glance it looked a lot like Times New Roman. It has the letter forms have the shape of Times New Roman, although if you zoom in more, they're very sharp serifs, unlike Times New Roman, but they have that kind of look. They're very pointy, angular kind of serifs with very little bracketing, very little transition in the brackets. If I go in here to zoom into the brackets, you can see they're almost like angled down here. The serifs are just kind of like angled, and it's very unique, and they have some really nice fonts. Their italic is kind of nice, has a nice curl to it with some kind of curling up, and they still have that sharpness to them. The bold gets very bold, and it even has a very unique kind of style where there's like a heaviness on the bottom of some of these fonts where they get bottom heavy. Look at the E's and the C's. They get very bottom heavy, so it's a very unique looking font, very angular. There's a lot you could do with it, and there's a lot of flexibility there. So I put that in there because I thought that would be a nice variation to use. Also Vulcorn, which is a little more into the slabby transitional side. I don't know if it's transitioning into modern, but it's kind of transitioning into slabby a little. When you go into the heavy, it has another nice selection of fonts going from regular all the way up to heavy. And you can see it's a really nice display font. If you put an italic, it has a really nice rounded, curled italic. It's a really nice font too. So I'm trying to pick out fonts that are nice to work with and that you'll get familiar with that old style kind of look. The next one here is Transitional, and it's sort of transitional, and it has, although in some ways it's a little square serif, you can see it has a square serif on the bottom, but it has kind of a higher X height. It has some thinner lines and has a little bit of angle of stress here. It's not completely up and down, so I don't know if it's a true transitional. It may be more transitional into a slab serif, but it's still a nice font to work with. It still has a nice big family going from regular up to bold, and there's like a semi-bold in here, so it's a really nice font. Has really nice shapes to the letters, has the little teardrop at the end of the R here compared to something like that where it has a curve, where these are kind of cut off at the terminal of the R. So it's a really nice font. So I think that's something to try out. And again, I want to limit us in terms of fonts so you're not going through these. I mean, look at these. You could go through these and you could just scroll just through the A's. I mean, there's hundreds, probably, maybe there's 1,000 fonts here. I'm not sure how many are here, but there's a lot. And I didn't even put any script or decorative or anything like that. And I tried to avoid fonts that don't have a family. There's a lot of nice modern fonts. Like this is a modern font here, Una. I guess it's called Una. And it has a family of regular, italic, and bold. And again, modern fonts are kind of straight. They usually have a high contrast between one of the strokes and the other stroke, between the primary stroke and the secondary stroke. There's usually that high level of contrast in the letter forms. The serifs are usually kind of flat. They usually don't have a lot of bracketing or transition from the serif into the letter. So this is a good idea of that style, and it's nice that it has a family. There's actually a lot of nice modern fonts in this list, but they don't have a family. It's just one typeface. So I thought it'd be nice to have a family of fonts to work with. And I'll zoom out a little bit here. Roboto Slab is what I picked for the slab. And again, the reason I picked that is because it has a nice family, so it's very flexible. It goes thin all the way through heavy. And on the web, this is used a lot for headlines. It's even used for some body copy and feature copy. It's a really nice font, and it's nice and readable. All of these Google fonts are very readable because they're meant to be seen on the web. They're not meant for paper. They're meant to be seen on screens, so they need to be nice and sharp and easy to read from further away, and also if the resolution isn't perfect on a computer screen. So these are nice fonts. Roboto's a nice font. There's also other slab serif fonts. There's really thick ones if you need for any, collegiate sportswear kind of stuff. Even though the heavy here is really heavy, you could do a lot of neat things with that. But there's even heavier fonts if you need. And then we get into the serifs, and I just picked out a couple serifs. Now the first three are really kind of one family, although they're listed as separate fonts, kind of like the way Arial and Arial Black and Arial Narrow are separate fonts. These are separate fonts, because you can go to Archivo, and there's a whole family between regular, medium, semi-bold, and bold. So there's a whole family of Archival fonts, and this is more of a grotesque, because remember, they have the flat on the top. Now, if I go in here to type, and I type a G, and I type a, and I type a small g, all of these are pretty much like a grotesque font, except for the G. The G's usually are open and they move to the left. This is more of a geometric or humanist kind of G, the lowercase g that is. But the A is pretty much what you'd see from something like Helvetica. This G is pretty much like Helvetica. And it doesn't matter, the G doesn't matter. It still looks nice. It's a very nice font. And you have a narrow version, you have a heavy version. And again, for this one, there only is the heavy version. This is Archivo Black. So there isn't a black version of this. There's only bold. So if you need something really heavy, you could use something like this. So let me go back and get rid of this, but I just wanted to show that. And the G, remember, that's the spur of the G. So these are grotesque sans serif fonts, which they're basically plain workhorse fonts, and they work well with other fonts. They combine nicely with other fonts. They're not that unique. Some other fonts are a little unique, and they don't mix well with other fonts. And all of these are pretty nice fonts here. I didn't use any of the geometric fonts that have those big circular type letters because they don't play nice with other fonts, and there's not many in here anyway, and they don't really look nice. I don't know that I've used a whole lot of avant-garde and fonts like that when I've designed. So the fonts they have here are very nice. There's the Archival fonts. There's this one called Catamaran, and it has a nice family. Again, it goes everywhere from thin all the way up to heavy and extra bold. It's a really nice looking font. It really flows, and look at how nice it flows from one letter to the next, the way that R goes into the A. Really nice readable font. These are sans serifs that are really nice and readable, so they're nice fonts to design with. You're not limited at all. It's just that these aren't the traditional names you're used to. You're used to seeing on typical computers, the Helveticas and the Gill Sans and Century Schoolbook and all those kind of fonts, and Garamond. And these have different names, but they're still nice fonts to design with. They come from the traditional development of fonts. And again, they're nice and readable. They're actually nicer designed fonts to work with on screen. And since your design is going to be both for print and screen, that's not really a bad thing. Franklin comes from a very standard font called Franklin Gothic, and this is a really nice, clean font that it works well in pairing. It pairs nice with other fonts. So if you have a decorative font, Libre Franklin pairs nice with it. It's nice as the secondary font. Some of these work nice as secondary fonts. And also, look at this. It has a thin, and then it goes all the way up to a heavy. So it has like such a huge range of typefaces in their family of fonts, which is really nice to work with. So you don't have to work with any other fonts. You could design an entire flyer just using the Franklin font. So it's a really nice set of fonts that we have here. And what's nice is everybody using Gravit is using these same fonts. So we have some consistency. And we have Roboto here. Now we had Roboto Slab. Now this is just plain Roboto, and it's also a nice family. It goes all the way from thin, very nice looking thin, stylistic kind of thin, all the way up to heavy. And it's a nice readable font, really, really nice. And you know, you're not going to miss using Helvetica or Arial or anything else with some of these fonts here when you design. They're really nice fonts, and you don't need a whole lot of fonts. What we have here just from our serif and sans serif list is really a nice set of fonts to work. And this one, Tajawal, I think it's called, has a nice family of fonts going from extra light all the way up to heavy. Really nice looking font, just like Roboto. Very nice looking, kind of distinctive. The J here is kind of cool looking. Has some nice angles on the letters, the way they're cut. So it's a really nice font too. So what I did was just kind of pick out these fonts and say, hey, let's stick with these. Instead of going through this list and going through 50,000 fonts and trying to find something. Now again, I did not put decorative fonts, Slacky and all these things. There's tons of these in here. If you ever need a decorative font, you're going to find one in here. And they have great script fonts. They have a huge collection of really nice script fonts, much better than you'll find on your computer that you'll have loaded on your computer. So there's really nice fonts here to work with. And you could do a lot of nice design work and stuff with some of these Google fonts. They're really nice. But for these, you know, this is your kind of your everyday fonts that you want to be working with. When we're talking about readability and legibility, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about using some of those decorative fonts. We're talking about using these fonts, and these should be fonts you stick with. So we're going to try to stick with these. Crimson Pro, Vulcorn, even Laura, they hold up well at small sizes. So there's a lot of nice serif fonts to work with. Slab Serif, you have a really nice modern here. And you have a whole grouping of sans serif fonts here. I don't think you need much more than this. You know, you might need a rounded font, you know, with a rounded end on it, but this is a really nice collection of sans serif fonts. If you're on a regular computer, you might be using something like Myriad, you might be using Frutiger, you might be using Futura, fonts like those, but these certainly compete well with those fonts, and there's nothing you're going to be missing in using these fonts, especially the big families that they have too. They have really nice families of fonts. So I just wanted to point this out. We're going to try and stick to these. So I'm posting the PDF, and I'll let you, take this file if you want. You can copy the file and save it into one of your folders. We'll try to stick with these fonts, especially for GRD 131 design. So we're not using all kinds of fonts. We'll try to stick with these so you're not looking through that gigantic list of fonts, and we'll get used to these. You want to get familiar with them too. I refer to this as this is like the starting lineup. Now there's a lot of great fonts, but this is going to be the starting lineup that we're going to stick with in the beginning. And again, I chose a lot of these because they have nice families of fonts. That's why I chose them. So this is what we're going to stick with. So get used to these, get familiar with them, copy the PDF and look at it, start designing with the fonts, start using them. Whenever you're in Gravit, I will always choose these types of fonts in here. I may throw in some decorative fonts and some script fonts, but we'll be using these fonts to pair with them once we start designing logos and pairing fonts together. So just wanted to point this out, and check for this in your documents and resources as a PDF file and also as a link, whether you're in GRD 131 or whether you're in GRD 132. It's worth checking them out as well as you learn about fonts.